on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons.
Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and while the D's used their get out of jail free card on the Gold Coast, my heart must have stopped about a dozen times in the last few frantic minutes. And when the final siren finally sounded, I pocketed the 4 points and breathed a sigh of relief as I made out like a bandit from Heritage Bank Stadium. George is still on the run somewhere in Europe, so once again, I'm joined solo tonight with Bin Man to dissect the ugly win against the Suns as we divvy up the loot from our plunder on the Gold Coast. Good evening, Bin Man. Ahoy, matey.
Good evening, Andy, and good evening, Demonlanders. Good evening, George in Italy, if you're happening to listen to it. And it's really curious how people see footy games differently. And, I was actually really interested to see your perspective on that. And obviously we'll get into it tonight, given the fact you were there, because I don't know where's this narrative coming from that we were lucky. I mean, I just don't, I will get into it, I know, but I'm flummoxed by some of the commentary on Demonland and some of the stuff I've heard in the media, and somewhat flummoxed as well by your opening. I mean, we didn't steal anything. They never had the lead at any point in that game of football, not once. Except for the first 30 seconds when they scored a point. After that, we kicked more points. We had more scoring shots than them. So I just don't understand the "we were lucky" narrative at all.
I don't know, maybe I just felt that maybe I underestimated them as a team, and I know they're a good up-and-coming team, but maybe I just expected more from us, and the fact that we had got up a few times and I thought we were going to run away with it, and we just let them come back in it. Well, not let them, but I don't know. We'll get into it shortly. Yeah.
So my take as a general comment was that I think it was just a fantastic win, a fantastic game to watch. If you were neutral, it would have been an awesome game to watch. It wasn't one of those games where we played poorly and got away with a win and blah, blah, blah.
I disagree. I think we did play a little bit poorly at times.
Well, I mean, we'll get into it a little bit, but it's interesting. I just think that the way that game was commented on, the commentary, and that's why I was curious because you went, is that I really think it's influenced people's thinking about it. This, Suns, I thought the Suns were awesome. I thought they played fantastic. I thought we played well. Of course, there was some players that were down and, but, as we'll get into, that was our third game in 12 days, 3 games of AFL footy in 12 days. Yep. And we've travelled north and we've got the 4 points. It's a super, super important win. It means that we go into next week against the heavy favourites to beat the Hawks, and then we go to Port Adelaide 7-2. That huge win, and I think we played fantastic, and they were fantastic. I mean, I said last week on the podcast that it was a concern for me, and I wouldn't be surprised if we lost. So, to leave Queensland with 4 points, I know Goody's thrilled just from his post-match comments. I've heard Chaplin's comments; they're thrilled, super proud of the players, and so am I.
And I'm happy to too, I guess. Let's each week we ask our listeners to give us a 5-star review, leave a comment on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast from, and as we do every week, we give those people a shout out as we read their reviews on the show. Witch's Hat says, easily the best D's podcast going around. Thank you, Witch's Hat. Rhino88 says, great podcast. Love the in-depth analysis you guys bring each week. Don't always agree with every point the guys make, but really appreciate the effort you put in to make this a must-listen pod for all demon lovers. Thank you, Rhino88. Very kind of you. As to your point about not always agreeing with us, it's perfectly fine. We by no means consider ourselves experts. Every fan's going to see the game differently. The podcast and Demonland provide, a venue for fans to express their opinions. We're not always going to agree, and I guess it would be pretty boring if we all did. Demonland, after all, is a forum for all Demons fans. So, Good Loden says, I wonder if that's a reference to you, Bin Man, says, awesome podcast. I'm so grateful of the time and effort put into the podcast. It makes me proud to be a member of a community with fans such as these. If any of the boys come up to Brisbane, I'd happily buy them a steak. Highly recommend. Thank you, Good Loden. I was just up in Brisbane in round 2 and last year in round 23. So by my reckoning, you owe me 2 steaks. I'm just kidding. But, if I ever meet any Demonlanders, always happy to shout a beer. The best thing, though, that listeners to the podcast can do for us is spread the word by telling other Demon fans about us and leave a 5-star review. So please take a moment now, pause the show, go and write that 5-star review for us to read out next week. The more reviews, the more the algorithm does its magic and we get more fans listening to the show. Always mention Apple Podcasts and then say, or wherever you get your podcast from. But to tell you the truth, I only have an iPhone and Apple Podcasts. I don't know what other apps are out there on Androids or other phones. I'm not sure what other apps there are, and I'm not even sure whether they have a review system. So if you're using another app and you've left us a review for us, please screenshot it, email it to demonland@demonland.com with the subject podcast review. I'll happily read it on the show. In fact, the other day I just realised that you can comment on each episode on Spotify, and some loyal listeners have left comments that way. Mary and Julian say, fantastic show, always great analysis and terrific insights. Thank you, Mary or Julian, or both if it's a family affair. Mikey says, hi, it's Mike. I like this podcast. Great, short to the point. Thanks, Mike. Noah says, the podcast is the best in the business for analysing Melbourne Demons games each week. They dissect the games as well as make it interesting. Thank you, Noah. And I wonder if that's our regular mailer, Noah from Bentley. And Noah from Bentley, you did leave 2 voice messages for us this week, but unfortunately you were outside. It was extremely windy. There was a lot of traffic noise and I could barely make out what you said. So just for anyone that's leaving a voicemail, make sure you're inside in a nice, quiet environment and leave your message that way. If you want to chat with other D's fans and you've never been to our forum, head over to demonland.com, sign up, and you can chat with other D's fans. It's completely free. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 039016 3666 9016 3666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, then bring you on when we can. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message, we'll play the voicemail on the show. If you're listening now live, join us in the chat room by simply heading over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday at 8:30 p.m. If you've downloaded this podcast and want to listen to us live, then please join us on Mondays at 8:30 p.m. at demonland.com.
Dissecting the rounds match from the depths of the game that was, it's over to Andy, Binman and George with the match wrap-up.
Just Andy and Binman tonight. This was the Demons' 4th interstate clash in 8 games this season, and if you exclude the gather round, that is 3 interstate matches for the year. No other Victorian team has had to travel that much this early in this season. Carlton, Collingwood, Essendon, Hawthorn North and Bulldogs have all played 2 interstate games, Richmond and Geelong 1, and St Kilda 0 travel outside of Victoria in 8 matches excluding the gather round. And you add to that, as B-Man said, this was our 3rd match in 12 days since Anzac Eve. And I guess you have to factor all of that in when you're analysing this particular match. And 20 minutes into the game against the Suns, the Demons appeared to be in total control of the match. We weren't dominating in the early clearances, but we were doing the hard running. We were hitting up targets, and our forwards were proving to be a handful for the Suns' defence as we got to an early 19-point lead. However, as would be the tale of the day, every time the D's got a bit of breathing space, the Suns would claw their way back level. The Suns' mids were not going to be bullied and they were going to fight the game out to the bitter end. In the ruck, Jared Witts matched wits with our Twin Towers, Gawn and Grundy, ending up all square in the hitouts with 37 each. Yet it was at ground level that the Suns gained the ascendancy, winning the clearances 42-6 and beating the D's at their own contested ball game 149-122. And that was without their superstar, Touk Miller. The very talented youngsters, Noah Anderson and Matt Rowell, had the measure of our hard-bodied tough nuts, Oliver Petraka and Viney. Rowell only had the 18 possessions for the game, but 11 of those were clearances. The D's got out to early leads in each quarter, only to be reeled in each time by the plucky Suns, and scores were level at the final term, helped by 3 free kicks for goals in the third quarter alone. And I mention these frees not to whinge about the umpiring, but as a counterpoint to many commenters on social media and commentators on the telly as well, it seems, who claimed that the Suns were stiff in the last quarter. And it was in that last quarter that the D's once again asserted themselves early, getting out to a 15-point lead, but the Suns weren't done yet. They just kept coming and coming. The usually reliable Bailey Fritsch failed to ice the game, kicking 3 behinds in the last quarter as his 35-game goal-kicking streak came to an end in a frenetic finish that saw a few bad Melbourne defensive errors. The Suns almost tied the game, but Darcy McPherson missed his chances to level the scores with 20 seconds remaining. So Big Man doesn't agree, but we dodged a bullet. We banked the 4 points and we move on to the next. And hopefully we take some learnings from this match. Big Man, has your heart recovered from this near miss? Well, maybe not such a near miss for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic game of footy. And I mean, that last couple of minutes was thrilling footy. That last quarter was fantastic. The whole match was close. We never got more than what was the furthest we got in front?
I think it might have been the 19 points early in the game when we were 3 something up.
I mean, I get the feeling like everyone, watching it felt like one of those games where, particularly in that last quarter, where we were going to get on top and roll over the top of them. All credit to them. I really rate the Suns. I thought that their performance was fantastic. We'll get into it a little bit later, but a lot was made of their contested ball numbers and the fact that we lost by 27, but I'll touch on that a bit later. But too much was made of that in my perspective is, the game looked very much like ours in some respects. And so we'll break that down as we get to the questions and things. But, just from a performance and a game of footy, I thought it was a fantastic game of footy. It was intense. It was fierce. They gave no quarter at all. They worked super hard. All through their midfield, their defence was strong. I thought they were well coached. It was great to get a victory out of it. Dodge a bullet in the end. Well, we still, even if you kick that goal, we're still 15 seconds when it goes back to the centre. You only need to score. We've got the best midfield in the AFL, even though we got touched up a little bit on the night. So, this game wasn't even necessarily, the worst really that was likely to happen was a draw. From that kick, 14 seconds left, still either side could have won from that point. I think a big factor, to be honest, was the break, and I know we'll touch on this, but was the forced break from when Ballard went down. That was 5 or 6 minutes. The game was stopped. We definitely had the momentum. We were 15 points up. We'd missed a couple of shots. We were looking like we were running on top of the ground much better than them. And I reckon that was a huge change in the feeling of the game, because essentially, 5-6 minute break, they could get, refuel completely. And that made that last quarter essentially a 20-minute quarter instead of a 30-minute quarter. And so we lost our momentum, but we also lost our relative fitness advantage we have over them, that I think we have over them. So, it really worked in their favour, that break, I reckon. And that last 20 minutes it was a ding-dong battle, great to watch. I'm thrilled that we ended up with 4 points.
Some of the numbers are spooky. Some can't be explained by conventional means. But that won't stop the boys from trying. Coming up now, it's the Demonland Stats File.
All right, Big Man, take it away. I'm not even sure what you're talking about tonight, so take it away.
You're going to have to bear with me now, Andy, and so thanks so much for getting these clips. I've talked about a number of times this season so far, my sense and my theory, I guess, that the game fitness levels is becoming critical and an absolutely determining factor in a team's chance of success. I really think that Burgess has got a lot to do with this, is that the game has changed pretty significantly, I think, on the back of the work Burgess has done. We had a huge advantage in 21, and other teams have now minimised that advantage because you've got some very fit teams out there. So, in terms of the stats, I'm trying to get a handle. We talked about this last week. What sort of stats would tell us, give us some sort of insight into relative fitness, from one team to another? So we've got a couple of clips. This first clip is Sanderson talking about the topic of fitness as it relates to, he's talking about Collingwood. It is incredibly difficult at the moment to find any sort of shows to get the clips from if it's not about Collingwood. So forgive me, but the clip I think is very applicable to Melbourne, and he does touch on Melbourne a little bit. Then we'll throw back to me, and then another audio clip of Hoyne from Champion Data talking about what stats are out there available that's gives some sort of sense of fitness, and a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but we'll touch on that. So if you could throw that first one, Andy, that'd be great.
But what Collingwood are doing better than anyone at the moment, Jared, is under fatigue and under exhaustion, they are able to execute. Part of that is they have to be the fittest side. They have to, because they are playing 120 minutes of footy every week. A lot of other clubs against Collingwood are playing 100 minutes of footy. So don't underestimate how fit this team must be. And you look at a player like Nick Dacos, and we talk about him every week, but it seems like he speeds up the longer the game goes. He gets faster almost, but it's not that. It's just he's so fit that as players are running slower under exhaustion and fatigue, he's running the same speed. And I think that whole Collingwood squad's a bit like that. They're able to, it's not that they're running faster when the game's up for grabs. It's just they're sustaining that level of fitness over 4 quarters. They're playing 120 minutes of footy. And that's the message for John Longmire this week is, boys, it's not play 100 minutes. It's play 120. So, but can they do it? Can physically you match Collingwood for 4 quarters? I know it's a long season and the finals are still a long way away, but we saw this with Melbourne a few years ago when they won their premiership. You couldn't outwork them. And I would say that to a team. I would say that to every team I've coached. We've got to be fitter when it really matters in the 4th quarter. But you can't say that if you're not. Yep. But Collingwood are the fittest side in the competition at the moment. Melbourne were 2 years ago and you couldn't get near them in 4th quarters. But we're seeing that at the moment with Collingwood. So you've got to form a game plan that you can not only match them, but you can somehow find a way to stop that run when it really matters.
Thanks, Andy. So, for me, that sort of in a nutshell, that fitness advantage that we had in 21 was huge for us. But what's important from a game plan perspective, it's not just fitness, is the game plan is built around that fitness and that level of fitness and that ability to keep running. So that wave running that everyone talks about for Collingwood, Melbourne do that too. You need incredible fitness of all 22 players because, the wave running involves 3, 4, 5 players. Collingwood push up really high up the ground and have to work really hard back. So their defenders also have to be elite runners in order to be able to get back and beat the ball back. We set our defence a bit deeper. So, we had a big advantage in 21 over the rest of the competition. Geelong absolutely went to town on that. And that was the thing last year. So Geelong Scott basically said we need to copy their program, and they did copy our program. They were the fittest side come finals, and you could see the outcome of that, winning the flag. Collingwood really, obviously pushed them as well. So I think this season it's interesting. I think Melbourne, Brisbane, Collingwood and Melbourne are the 4 fittest sides, and we're also the 4 best sides by some margin. What he just said about the fitness advantage of Collingwood over every other team or most teams, I'm not sure that Selwyn Griffith would. I'd love to ask him whether he thinks Collingwood are fitter, but let's take Sando at he's ranking that they're fitter than us. But that's how that game against Sydney, the Collingwood Sydney game, actually played out, didn't it? Is that they just couldn't go with them in that 4th quarter. So I think Burgess is really, he drove that running and that power, and Selwyn Griffith and others obviously have taken that on Geelong. I had a friend, were talking about their drop-off in the first 2 or 3 seasons, and he suggested that, potentially on the, this year I'm not going to talk about loading much. Let's just focus on the fitness. How they get there is up to the clubs, but the Geelong in those first 2 or 3 games of the season were clearly not fit, and he hypothesised is that perhaps they pushed their heavy period of training into the season to be as fresh as possible. For instance, for their unfurling of the flag, and what was interesting of the game, and I forget who they were playing, but Joe Watson mentioned in that game when they broke their losing streak how much fitter and faster and over on top of the ground that they were clearly running, and he wondered the same thing, which is the first time I've heard a commentator talk about that, that aspect of fitness. And they've been amazing since. They've rolled over teams. Essendon went with them, who I also think are a really fit side. So for me, fitness is huge, but then how do we get data on how do we know? So I said last week, for me, from what's out there publicly available, at last quarters should be a good indication. Now, Sanderson was just talking about how brilliant Collingwood are in last quarters. So I think it's really important to note, if you're thinking about trying to work out where Melbourne might be pegged against the Pies, is we've yet to lose a last quarter so far. So you know what, we're round 8 and we've won 8 last quarters. So that's pretty good evidence for me that we're in pretty good shape. The club are talking about that. They've made a real point about those final quarters, and you can see when Melbourne can't run the game out, then our game plan just doesn't work. Collingwood's game plan won't work either if their fitness drops off. So it's not just fitness; it's keeping it through the season. So the question I have last week is what sort of data that we can get. So if you can play this next clip, that hopefully it answers it in a roundabout way.
Before we get to your last talking point, Binman wants to know, what's the best data to get a handle on the relative fitness of teams? I am firmly of the belief that fitness is now one of the top 3 most important factors in being ready to go to win a flag. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, we do, and the obvious answer is the GPS related data that we
which you don't release.
We have, but we are not allowed to release under current agreements at the moment. We're only allowed to celebrate players. Kane, you can imagine what you could actually do.
Can you give us a hint on is it reflective of the ladder position?
I actually wouldn't have a clue. I don't look at it because I can't use it, so I just don't worry about it. But
It'd almost be self-evident that that's the case. So
I would have thought so.
I would have thought you got talent, you got system, and you've got physical attributes, injuries, and fitness. But nevertheless, we'll send somebody in to steal that data from you. And whilst you're going hot,
Binman, 3 things about that. 1, you didn't get permission to go on, from me to go on to another show, even if it is via text form. 2, it's obviously a privacy thing. Is that why they can't release the GPS data? Is that a privacy thing for the players?
No, it's because clubs pay a fortune for it, and they don't want to release it.
Okay, they don't want other
actually,
teams.
what I meant to ask was, and I checked my text, but I didn't. I meant to ask what publicly available data. That's what I wanted to know. I know that the GPS data is locked up. Having said that, you can tell from the questions at the end, it's a huge frustration. It just drives me bananas that the AFL allow champion data to lock this data up. AFL are, as I understand, I might be wrong on this, but my understanding is AFL was a shareholder in champion data, and that data that they cherry pick it and give some to the Herald Sun and to Fox, and that's where that pressure gauge thing is, and to the clubs. Obviously the GPS data, I mean, it won't be privacy, it'll be simply because the clubs won't want any other clubs to know their numbers. But it should be publicly available, because you can imagine how that would change people's engagement with information. The way they dole out the bits, and I'll get to this because it drives me nuts, the way they dole out the data and the stats skews people's thinking about the game. And so, for instance, the question about the clearance numbers and their contested ball, in particular the contested ball, the Suns winning by 27, people have drawn assumptions on that are incorrect, and they keep banging on about it. And the assumption that many seems to be drawing, including David King and the commentators, is that that's indicative of they were much harder at it all night. But the data doesn't support that. It does for that particular stat. It does. But the pressure gauge, which by the way, I mentioned last week that I didn't think the club looked at that during the game. Sanderson in that same clip talked about the use of the pressure and the importance of it, and said that they show the players live during the game where everyone is and the team is. And he said it's twos is the like elite level, and I think on television they make that 200. But he said it's 2, and then 1.8's the standard average. So just on that pressure, for instance, that pressure rating for this game, first quarter it was 186 to Suns 193, so their pressure was fantastic in that quarter, but we worked our way through it. From that point on, we had more pressure on that rating than them in the last three quarters, so 179 to 178, 179 to 166, in the fourth quarter, indicating this is probably another good measure of relative fitness. It was 191 to the Ds, which is close to elite, to 172 with the Suns, who were going hard. I heard no one question their pressure in that last quarter. They were 19 pressure points below us on that ranking. So it was 184 to 177 for the game. And then the other pressure, just looking at clearances. Of course, that's a key stat for us. But our other two stats are 50 is time in forward half, as I mentioned last week, and we were 56-44 time in forward half. 56% of the time it was in our forward half, and that is exactly how a Melbourne game how Goody wants a Melbourne game to look. And we were plus 16 and inside 50s. So that tells me a lot was working in terms of what a Melbourne game would look like. And the other one, so in combination with pressure data, is our turnover stats. We scored nearly 7 goals more than them on turnover, and turnover is purely a function of pressure. So if you combine our pressure data, so we applied more pressure than them on that rank, that set of numbers, and we smashed them in turnover. That suggests to me that our work rate and effort was really, really good. And so the narrative that somehow we were off and we didn't work hard, and it's just not supported by the data. And that's what drives me nuts about the way, for instance, David King cherry picks the information, is that one data point's of not much value. It's the same thing with clearances. You need to look at all of the data that tells a team's pressure. They've got a pressure gauge. He didn't even mention it on the both on any of the shows that I've heard him talk. And you've got the turnovers. Turnovers, some might happen just through pure clangers, but almost always they're because of a team's pressure. So we killed them on turnover. We got the ball inside 50. They're 2 of our 3. Our meters gains were about level. So, credit to the Suns, but we've still were a little bit ahead. So I just don't think the clearance numbers by themselves gives a good sort of sense of our pressure for the game.
The guy from Champion Data sort of hinted that he doesn't even look at those stats because they can't use it, but I reckon he 100% looks at those stats.
He'll look at the pressure ones.
Yeah.
I mean, the GPS numbers might not be of much interest to many because you'd have to work through it all and see what there is some, it's interesting he didn't mention this, but the tracking data I've tried to look at, I talked about that a few weeks ago, is whether that tracking, the GPS, the Telstra tracker on the AFL app, it does give an indication of distances run and who's run them, but I'm not sure how well it indicates things other than running capacity, because you can only see the top 5 or whatever it is. But yeah, it just drives me nuts that the AFL allow Champion Data to lock it up. I just think if they let all of the data out there, how much more engagement would there be by fans trying to work it out rather than looking at through the sort of myopic lens of David King?
If getting that data out into other clubs would affect us as a team in a way, would you not want that data to get out there, or would you selfishly like to pour through that data?
I mean, I don't know. I'm obviously no expert. It'd be something I'd love to ask Selwyn Griffith is, how useful would the GPS data? But I'm sure that they could generalize it in a way that could give some, they don't need to drill down on the player level. That's what other clubs would be interested in, I would have thought. But they could surely give the global GPS numbers. This is how far that team run. This is the sort of, that thing that I talked about, Tom McDonald was talking about with Nibbler and Spargo, that idea of them running at striding pace. How many players running at that sort of information would be, really helpful to understand how fit a team is. And then it would help explain, for instance, why a team like Carlton have chip it around. There's a good chance that they've chip it around because their numbers tell them they're not fit enough to go with a team like Collingwood. So what do? It's what clubs did to us last year, is they weren't fit enough to go with us except for Collingwood and Geelong. And so when they came up to us, if they allowed the game to get into a running game, we'd just roll over the top of them. So they slowed it down, and that's what Sydney, not so much Sydney, sorry, that's what Carlton are trying to do. And it tells me that they're probably not as fit as they want to be. And their GPS data will tell them that. And so I can see why the clubs wouldn't want to share their information, but I'm sure you could do it in a way that, that at least gave you some sense of relative fitness of the teams. Like Jared Healy just asked, give us a clue. What are they, top four? And I'll bet you any money it's Collingwood, Melbourne, Geelong and Brisbane. They're the four fittest teams.
Did you want to play that third clip?
No, later, if it comes up. But
okay.
Yeah, it's not sort of specific to this.
All right.
We've all got opinions and we've all got our own thoughts, but we like to get another take on it. You can get your questions and say through on 0390163666 and via demonland.com. It's time to hear from you with your listener questions on the Demonland podcast.
Each week we ask Demonlanders to post their questions and comments in that week's podcast thread on demonland.com, and we always read them out and answer them on the show. If you're not a member of Demonland and you just listen to the podcast, then what are you waiting for? Head on over to demonland.com, sign up and join in on the conversations. In addition to asking questions for the podcast, there are a plethora of other conversations about all things D's related. If you really want to just ask a question but aren't on Demonland, then shoot us an email at demonland@demonland.com with the subject question for the podcast. You can also leave us a voicemail at 0390163666, 0390163666. And don't worry, nobody answers, so you don't have to talk to a human. If you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, on Instagram, just slide into our DMs, ask a question there. We'll keep your real name anonymous if you wish. Mandy Lorian says, I just wanted to give you a shout out for the wonderful and insightful interview you conducted with Stephen May during the week. Stephen was very forthcoming and honest in his answers. Kudos to all involved in getting him on the podcast. Love your work. And thank you for that feedback, Mandy Lorian. It was so good to have a chat with Stephen, who is one of Demonland's sponsored players this season, along with Brodie Grundy. And if you haven't already listened to the interview, be sure to check it out. It should be the podcast before the one you're currently listening to right now. Stephen was a fantastic interview. He gives you so much, some great insights about his journey from Darwin to Melbourne, to the Gold Coast and back to Melbourne, earning a captaincy, 2 All-Australians and a premiership along the way. It was also great to get his thoughts on some of our up-and-coming players. So do yourself a favour and go have a listen after this podcast. Did you get a chance to listen, Big Man?
I did. It was a fantastic, fantastic interview, and I really enjoyed it. And he's an interesting fella, isn't he? He's so honest, and he's his assessment of players is really interesting. He doesn't, it's pretty clear. You get a pretty clear sense, don't you, of his of where he thinks his teammates are at. So I thought it was a fantastic interview, really interesting. It made me laugh to think of Batman and Robin driving around town in his Monaro or whatever he drives, because I heard he's a bit of a rev head, him and Lever.
Yeah,
so Lever's in the car next to him.
So when we started when I started the call with him, he said, "Oh, hope you don't mind. I'm just getting in the car." I think they were coming home from Casey with Jake Lever. And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'm happy to have him along for the ride." And the whole time I couldn't help sort of imagining Jake Lever next to him. And I did say, "Look, I'll take out all the questions I've got about Jake Lever in there." So no, that was great.
I thought what I was really interested in was his discussion of his time up at the Suns in that period. And, he was young when he was made captain, wasn't he? And thrown into it in the deep end, really. I thought that was a really interesting part of his story. And, his ability to sort of... It was interesting him talking about being a forward. He was a forward as a junior, and I'd forgotten about that. But I remember a game against Melbourne. He was kicked goals against us, or perhaps I'm imagining that. But he played forward for the Suns, didn't he? So it wasn't always defence. And I thought it was funny that he was his comments about not getting a chance to be swung forward.
We have a caller joining us. Caller, you're on the air. Oh.
Hello.
Hello. Are you driving at the moment?
I am, yes. Sorry, Andy.
That's all right. Who am I talking to?
It's Red Leg 23. How you going, boys?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad, thanks. Not too bad. Have I called at a good time, or have I interrupted at all?
No, go for it. I'll get your question out, and then I'll put it down onto mute. You'll still be able to hear it, just so I get the car noise out of the way. So take it away.
Fantastic. Just a quick one, lads. I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Jack Viney. I reckon he's been super this year, and he plays such an integral part for the team. Unheralded a lot of the time, I think. I mean, obviously he got the award a couple of weeks back in the Anzac Eve game, which was much deserved. I just think that we've had a couple of games this year where it's been really combative and really tough and really hard. And in those games, he's really stood out to me, Jack. He just throws his weight around and he plays such a huge part physically in the team, and he's just such a bit of a barometer for us. So I just wanted to give Jack a bit of a shout out. He probably doesn't get the plaudits obviously externally, but we love him internally obviously. But I think he plays such a huge factor, especially when we're playing these tough games, such as the weekend. I mean, there were numerous occasions over the weekend where he just had no regard for himself at all, and he's so selfless. I mean, even that mark in the last play to sort of back, and he would have felt a lot of heat coming from the opposing forwards, but he just at no point did he ever hesitate, and he stood himself in the hole and he took that grab. So I think he's just such a huge barometer for us, especially when the going gets tough.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put you down onto mute. Thank you for the call. Appreciate it, mate. B-Man, your thoughts on the vice captain, Jack Viney?
I think that the caller, Red Legs 23, was it?
Yes.
Red Leg, it was absolutely spot on, and I continue. It sounds like I'm in a bit of a grumpy mood tonight, but that's not the case. I continue to get amazed by how underrated a player he is. There was one quite funny comment from the commentators who had just a nightmare, I thought, but calling him in the fifth Beatle, which sums him up a little bit. He was awesome in that game, and I think he was critical in that last 20 minutes. As I said, I think the game really, basically it was sort of a start. The game started again after that break, and I thought he was a huge factor in that last quarter. I love the fact his kicking seems to have improved. He uses the ball really well on that pressure rating numbers. So the other, and thanks for Willow Ratings has got this again this week in the stats file thread that's on Demonland. But he the most pressure points in our team. He topped that charts with 65. I'm not quite sure how that they calculate that for individual players, but 65. Sparrow was next on 62. Pickett, Oliver, Neil Bullen, Petraka, Gawn and Van Rooyen. But Viney on top of the pressure stats. And the other thing, just while I think of it, is he was a tackling beast in this game. It was a high pressure, heavy tackle game. And just another sort of data point or stat that supports my contention that, in fact, our pressure and effort was excellent, was that we were plus 22 in tackles. So for the team, it wasn't as if we were behind and chasing them all game. Plus 22 tackles is a big number, and was a big factor, led by Jack, and it was a big factor, I think, in our win, and certainly scores from turnover, which is what we really value. And just on scores from turnover, a really interesting stat that Hoyne said on yesterday's thing that he does on SEN was that you're twice as likely to score from a turnover as you are from a clearance, which I thought is fascinating because everyone goes to clearances. Everyone talks about clearances being such a key metric. If you turn it over, you're twice as likely to score a goal as you are from a clearance, which is, explains to a degree, if you're looking at analytics, why we put such a huge emphasis on scoring from turnover and not as much of an emphasis from scoring on clearances.
Well, it sort of makes sense because from clearances, everyone's set up. They usually got an opponent, and turnovers you usually catch out oppositions off guard. I can understand why that happens, yes.
Well, I hadn't quite worked this through, but Hoyne was saying that, he's a reason why was from turnovers you've got I'm going to misrepresent what he said. But he said the data shows that you're twice as likely. You get 2 chances at it is what he was saying, and I couldn't quite work out what he meant by that. So, all
right, I'll do your research next time, big man. Thank you, Redlegs 23. Really appreciate the call. Lazy says, was this a poor performance for Melbourne? And I'm sure you'll have thoughts on this, big man. Or did we simply run into a good team that put it all together and possibly even outplayed us on the night? I thought the Suns did a lot of things right. They have a lot of skill through the middle, and when they had possession, it was not easy to get it off them. This was the best game I've seen Noah Anderson play. We weren't at our blistering best for 4 quarters, and there were some below par performances, but I still see this as a good win early in the season away from home. I hope I'm not alone here. And, I'll take a win any day. I was up on the Gold Coast for the match, and I went away from the match relieved, and big man, you're going to completely disagree with me, but my feeling was I felt like it was a loss. I didn't feel like it was a win, and maybe that's just me being selfish and wanting to sort of thrash teams, but I thought we did play well in patches, but I also thought we were outplayed in some of it, and despite their ladder position, Gold Coast, they're a very talented side. They're on the verge of threatening to get into the 8. They've been competitive in quite a few games this year, but seemingly ran out of steam at the end in some of those. Certainly not in this one. They probably would have been very disappointed not to have pinched that one there. Big man?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as I've said already, I think that our performance was massively underrated, and as if Demonland's anything to go by lots of Demons fans, certainly by Joe Public. I mean, I totally get the feeling because it felt like we were always on the edge from my perspective of getting away from them. And so maybe there's a sense, it's a bit disappointing that we didn't. But
that's my
to be honest, it's disrespectful to the Suns. Yeah. I mean, they are an excellent team. It's what I said last week, that our one wood is clearances, so's theirs. So, just because they won clearances, contested ball, I should say. Our one wood's contested ball, it's core to our game. It's also core to their game. But as I said before, time in the forward half and turnover are the other key elements for us. And pressure, obviously, that's a given. And we beat them in pressure. We beat them in tackles. We beat them in time in forward half, and we beat them on turnover handsomely. We beat them by 6 or 7 goals on turnover. They didn't really get that much more from clearances score-wise. And I think it was like 15 points or something.
We had a lot more inside 50s.
We had 16 more inside 50s. I mean, so on all of the metrics other than clearances and contested ball,
I think that's where my disappointment comes in, that we didn't win by more.
But then
considering all that stuff, it's not disrespecting them. They did play good, but we had the chance to go even.
We had the chance to win 4 points. We won 4 points.
Well, I'll take that. I said I'll take the 4 points.
Well, I mean, look, we travelled yet again. Third game in 12 days.
And I said
played a really
at the start,
good team on their home deck in tricky conditions, it was clear that after halftime that Jew played a big role. They played out of their skin. Like if you read Dem and Lamb beforehand, everyone was saying, don't take this team lightly, as if we're just going to go in there and roll over. I'd be happy with a win. Some of those same posters then are jumping up and down about how well the Suns played. I mean, yes, they pushed us. Yes, they beat at stoppages and clearances and ground ball, which for me is the real worry. I mean, no one's really talking about that, but they smashed us in ground ball. And for me, that's the biggest worry from that game, because that's an area that we've struggled in, particularly down back, and they, that they really exposed that a little bit. But as I said before, let's not let a narrative take hold where we were lucky to win. We led for all but the first 30 seconds of the game. The scoreboard slightly flattered them as they were more accurate than us, and our scoring accuracy reverted to mean a bit. Despite them winning contested ball and clearances, perhaps more significantly clearances, we kept them to 85 points. When was the last time, we even won after conceding a differential of 27 contested possessions? I mean, that's a huge performance. So the defence held up, despite, once again, one of our senior defenders being a really laid out, with Hibbo being a laid out. I mean, we really missed his physicality, experience and strength. And similarly, when Lever went out, so that's happened twice. He was a huge out. It was on it was an hour and a half before the game that was called, and we replaced him with someone who was outsized, proceeded to put him on Casbolt in disco. He had 22 more tackles, as I said, plus 35 scoring from intercepts. They're huge differentials in a game of footy, and they're both key to us winning, which, as I said before, suggests our pressure was good and our effort was good. Despite them winning most of the key stats, as you said, we kept them to 45 inside 50s, smashing them in that stat by 16. That's huge, So they're, their pressure and contest work was off the charts, and they were great, as good, if not better, than any team we've faced, I think, this season. Rao and Anderson were brilliant. They were fantastic all game, but they're, as they should be. They're both, top 5 draft picks, aren't they? I mean, I know Rao's 1. Where did Anderson go? He was 2 or 3, wasn't it?
He was, so Jackson was 3.
Which is an excellent ruck. Took it up to Max and Grundy all day. They'd been favourite to beat any team with that performance. So, for us to get the 4 points after losing in a couple of our core stats is just a brilliant result, and we should be proud. And, if you talked about Dew, I'm not sure if you saw the presser, he was saying that, his implication was that was one of their best performances ever. And that David King on First Crack said in his view, it was their best performance ever, full stop, including, even though they lost the game. So, we came up against a team that played super well, and we beat them.
You mentioned the 85 points, and I remember you saying something about the D's needing to maybe adjust. We averaged 65 points against us in 2021, 69, I think, in 2022. And you said this year with the faster game style, we needed to sort of readjust that. And I asked Stephen May that, and he sort of poo-pooed that and said, no, obviously Goody would prefer we didn't let any scores happen. So, yeah.
He didn't entirely poo-poo it. He just said, no, Goody would prefer we don't. And it's a really interesting, and we'll probably talk maybe in the mid-season, but for me, there's 2 philosophies that are coming up, which is Macrae's attack really sort of, risk allowing goals out the back, and Melbourne still attacking, taking some elements of that really fast game plan that, everyone has been led by Collingwood, which in turn was a response to what we were doing. The only way to beat Melbourne in 21 and into 22 was with fast ball movement. We talked about it on the podcast, and that's exactly what Collingwood done. They built a system to beat us. The question will be whether our defensive, Macrae is more attacking philosophically than Goodwin. And the question will be, will we be able, which will prevail? Historically defences prevail, but it's going to be the question going forward.
Bigfoot says, it's no secret that we have not had a settled backline this season, with injuries to some key members at different times, May, Lever, Hibbo and Salo and Petty playing forward. We also seem to struggle once the ball hits the deck. Teams are finding it very easy to score against us in the chaos. Is this a symptom of not getting a good run at the same 6 or 7 players, or is the ball coming in too quick? I fear some of the stronger teams will destroy us. And I guess he's right about us not being settled down back. It has to be a factor. It's got to be a huge factor. And I think one of our biggest weaknesses, not just this year, but it's been for a while, is once the ball hits the deck. And in past years, it's been a big issue for us as our defensive set. It hasn't been a big issue for us in the past because our defence has always been able to set up well and intercept a slow ball coming in. That was a hallmark of our game, and the game's changed with the ball coming in quicker, and perhaps we're getting exposed, as we've said. And Big Man, you've said that we have struggled since Neville Jetta sort of left. Is this a concern for you, the ball when the ball hits the deck?
Well, that is. I mean, just back to sort of the question. I think that, defensively, I think all teams are struggling this year defensively with the fast ball movement. It's the zone breaker, isn't it? Because if you can move it quickly enough into your forward line, and in terms of the D's defensive area, it just makes it so much more difficult to get that third man across and zone off and intercept mark, and much more one-on-one contests. And you could see there was a really good example of that scenario with the kick that's set up, and I forget who kicked it into Casbolt, but the one where I think it was I'm pretty sure it was the third quarter, where Casbolt was just way too strong for Disco and marked one-on-one. If you look at the replay of that mark, whoever was the player kicking inside 50 for the Suns was unpressured at the time. The ball, he was moving quickly, and there was no time for Lever. Chol did a good job of sort of keeping him from it, but there was no third man into that contest. It was all one-on-one, exposing Disco to one-on-one with Casbolt. That's the challenge that we face in a nutshell that we didn't probably in 21, for instance, because you would have had Petty coming across. I think we need Petty back there at the moment. He's using him for a specific reason, for a contest up forward, but ultimately he'll go back. I think we really miss him. We missed Hibbo in this game. There's no question what you're saying is correct around you change personnel and in and out, it's going to have a factor. I think what's interesting is Goody's designing a new sort of defensive system. How much of the old zone system can go forward? We still will probably be a zone team. We are a zone team, but also having to find new ways to when teams are trying to spread us. So they're not only getting the ball in quick, they're changing lanes to isolate Stephen May and Lever and to minimise the amount of times we can come across. But other teams are doing that, for instance, to Port Adelaide and trying to minimise Alir's influence. And, so it's all of the defences are struggling. That when the better teams beat us, who is the better teams? Brisbane beat us, but we've got Collingwood and that will be a test. But we are the better team. So, It's like I don't think our defence will fear anyone.
Radelaide asked, what did you make of Disco Turner's match? And I guess bowl reports, and you said an hour and a half. Hibbert pulls out from the team very late. Preparation-wise, it wouldn't have been the best time to get a call up. What did you make of Disco Turner's second match? You said he was a bit outbodied. By the bigger body, but that was a match-up thing, I would say. And
well, there were a few things. I thought it was to be honest, I thought it was a bit unusual they picked him. I know that because he was replacing Hibbo.
So what would you have done? Who would you have?
Well, he was brilliant the previous week. So, perhaps it was as simple as that, is that he earned his selection, and, selection integrity says that, he comes in as a defender. So I actually see, I think he's a real player. I really like him. But, where I see him ending him up as a defender is a Lever type intercepting player because he's neat, he's a really neat kick. He reads the ball well in flight. He's super competitive. He's, as brave as all get out. He's got good hands, and he took a couple of good marks. I see ultimately, I think I probably would have picked him if that, because, they did try to stretch us with tools, and there's a question about that, whether teams are doing that.
It's now, I'll just get it. Ross Millen, related questions, are teams trying to stretch our backline by playing with extra height up forward?
So I absolutely think they are, and that goes to the fast ball movement means that you're more likely to expose Stephen May to a one-on-one and Lever to a one-on-one, and that you could see when Tomlin, that's why he came out of the side, I think, because, when he got exposed one-on-one. So I think yes is the answer. Essendon certainly did. And the Suns were looking to do so too. But, I was a bit surprised. Ultimately, they did move him back when Disco went off as the sub. Lever went on to Casbolt, and I reckon they should have done that right from the get-go and have Disco in Lever's role. I guess the numbers, Casbolt didn't kill us, but he was certainly too big and too strong for Disco.
Red Jacket says, we were beaten in the clearances, smashed in the contested possessions. I know you love hearing this, big man. Yes, the Suns are an up-and-coming team, and Rowell and Anderson are high draft picks, and the next generation of elite midfielders. Is it worrying that they put on a clinic in front of our midfield stars? And I reckon a clinic, it might be a little bit harsh. Go ahead.
Oh, that's right. Look, you're clear. And that's part of the problem of listening to the peanuts who commentate. David King said not once but twice, and again he doubled up on First Crack, that they humbled us. Humbled us? Give me a break. We won the game, and as I said before, it's not as if that is a magic number. The contested ball isn't a magic number in of itself. I can't believe no one commented on the fact that we won the day on that their pressure rating. Fox have got access to that data. It came up on the screen. Every quarter but the first quarter, we beat them on the pressure rating. We smashed them on the pressure rating in the last quarter. So, David King, give me a break on the humbled thing. So, and I'm not having a go at the question. It's just that I think that's what frustrates me about what I said before about allowing a narrative to get hold and suddenly it becomes a fact. It's just the numbers do not support it.
Ross Millen asks another question. It seems experimentation is continuing. Against the Suns, it appeared as though Max and Grundy spent time helping each other in marking contests more than usual. How do you expect this experimentation phase to continue? How long do you expect this experimentation phase to continue? And when will they settle the game plan down? And I did notice on one or two occasions that when Max was going for a mark, Grundy would bump Max's opponent, legally, I think, sort of in the side. Was this evident for you on TV? Did you notice anything with Grundy protecting Max?
Yeah, well, the commentators mentioned it a few times how rare it is for not just the way they used Grundy and Max, and it was them both being in the forward line at the same time. And I was trying to think whether that's new, but Maxie was out for a period of time, and I don't recall them, but it looked like there were at least 4 or 5 times when both forwards were in both rucks were in our forward line, and they showed some footage on I think First Crack, or maybe it was at halftime of that game, of Grundy going flat out running ahead of the ball to get to the forward line to beat the ball there, so that there were the two tall. So that was actually quite interesting, and you're right, like twice they screened for each other, and I thought it was fantastic to see. Chol was probably very unlucky not to be paid the mark, I thought, but came off the pack off Max, and Grundy roved it and snapped that goal, his first goal.
And have a look if you see that all the goals, the 2 goals that, or the 2 marks that Grundy took and then kicked goals. Did he kick 2 or 3? No, 2, whatever. He took marks.
2, yeah.
Look how happy Max is that he took the mark. He's got his arms up in the air. Yeah, he was wrapped.
Just on the experimental thing, I think we are experimenting, and much more than previous years. And just a comment about that, I talked about the way with the fast ball movement, as I said last week, is that means that there will be more volatile results because you can get hurt on the rebound, just like Collingwood can get hurt on the rebound. And, it opens up to some anomalous results. In 21 and the first half of last season, we could rely on our system and our relative fitness advantage over everyone but, Collingwood and Sydney probably, and Geelong. And at the end of the season when we ran out of puff. But we can't anymore because, one, our system is in flux a little bit because we are experimenting and we are trying different things. And I think Goody's leaning into that aspect. And, again, as we've talked about, Goody has been experimental and willing to try things ever since he began being a senior coach, as we an example being that, the diamond shape off the halfback flank, for instance, in 2016, 17 or 17. So, yeah, he really is experimenting both up forward and I think he's experimenting with our defensive system to see what's the best way to protect against that ball coming, down quickly and how to mitigate when they do get the ball quickly into our forward line, and we haven't been able to get across, or there's lots of ones on one. So, this clip, the other third clip that I asked you to do, Andy, would be probably a good spot now for that, because Hoyne talks about that very aspect.
Before we get into that, just the actual overall observation of the round so far, and if we're, I think. You don't want to be perfect at round 7. And I think if you go back over the last 4 or 5 years, aside from Melbourne in 21, that sort of win-loss record from a Geelong perspective last year, from a Richmond perspective, from a Hawthorn perspective, at their best was always around about that 4 wins out of 7, maybe a 5 out of 7, if you like, to start the year. We saw Melbourne last year; they were flying really early, in the season. We saw the Dogs flying in 2021. We saw Port flying in 20. We saw Geelong flying in 19. We saw Richmond flying in 18. But I think now, if I look across the competition, there's no one at the moment who is perfect. And we haven't said that about a team at round 7 for quite a while. So I just wonder whether or not the competition is actually looking at what those premiers have done recently and actually experimenting a little bit, changing a few things up. We've seen that with Melbourne. We're seeing that through Collingwood at the moment. We're seeing that through Geelong. Brisbane change up a few different personnel changes. It's a long year. You don't want to be perfect. And at the moment, there is no one who is perfect.
Except they think Collingwood's perfect, but I guess their experimentation's coming through necessity with a few injuries and stuff, but
Yeah, well, though, I'm probably not one out here, but, my football resolution this year was not to underestimate teams. So, I'm guilty of that with Collingwood. But, I think that Sanders is right. They're incredibly fit. They're really switched on. They're a team that's got a good culture, well coached. But I think they've got a defensive weakness. They push up so high up the ground that we're uniquely positioned to exploit it. But also I'd point out that, people, speaking of numbers, we're second on the ladder at the moment. We've got the highest percentage of any team in the competition, and 8 rounds in is more than enough data to make some assumptions and to do some proper assessment of where we're at. What's interesting about, if you compare Melbourne and the Pies, is we've had a very, very similar draw so far. We've played 2 or 3 of the same teams, but in terms of difficulty, it's almost identical in terms of how hard. They've won 1 more game than us, but we are 17% in front of them. Everyone that's talking about how rampant and ultra high scoring them are, they've won 1 more game than us with a very similar draw. We're 17% more in our percentage. I mean, so even that narrative for me is a media thing that everyone's buying into. Everyone loves them, but we're travelling as well, if not better than them at the moment. That's, apart from the fact they're on top of the ladder, they've one more win. The other numbers are looking pretty good in our favour.
Mandalorian says, I thought our forward line was in a bit of a shambles. Is the petty experiment officially over? Surely Ben Brown has to come back into the team. El Diablo 14 adds, with T-Mac and Big Benny Brown not to the level required, what's the next best thing we can do with our forward line? At some point, maybe in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we need to have a settled forward line and a defensive line too, for that matter. I guess from a scoring perspective, there doesn't appear to be a problem with our forward line. We're the second highest scoring team, 3 points behind Geelong, who have 2 of the best forwards in the competition. Having said that, I don't think our tall forward line is just right at the moment. I mentioned last week that we're not getting enough from our tall forwards pushing up the ground. I don't like Petty as a permanent forward. I've got no problem with him swinging forward late in games or as a swing player. I'd prefer him down back, and I'd bring in Ben Brown or T-Mac to the side and Petty down back. And I don't know if we're going to do that. I think they'll may persist with Petty. I don't know, big man.
I think that it's important to go back to that commentary from Hoyle just before about we're experimenting.
Yeah.
We're experimenting now is the goodie, we won't be locking in our final forward line in 3 or 4 weeks. We won't until, probably round 17, 18. And in fact, I heard Goody, in fact, say that in one of his recent presses, saying that, that's when he'll be looking. I think he was specifically asked, at what point in the season will you want to have your favoured forward line? And he said, the implication was near the end of the season. So it may not be till around 17, 18. I don't know. This is just a feeling I've got, is that I don't think Benny Brown or T-Mac are maybe at the fitness levels or physical preparation or what it is quite yet. Benny Brown kicked 3 goals. I didn't see any of that game. Played all right by all accounts, but I've read a few things saying he looked a bit slow still. So my sense is that the 3 talls is what they'll go with. Maybe that Grundy and Max both pushing forward at the same time was another part of the experimentation. Maybe it won't be needed if that system works. But I think ultimately they'll look to bring one of those 2 talls in around by the end of the season. That'll be the setup, and Petty will go back. Petty may stay up forward at the moment if they don't do Brown in, because his job is really just to compete. But I agree with all of the comments that he's not a natural forward, and he is a natural defender. And I think we've really missed him, missed his physicality. We just talked about the defence before. You mentioned that we haven't really had that small defender since Jets left. And I was trying to think who would be the player that we're not going to be able to get him, but who would we take if we could? And for me, it'd be Quaynor. That's exactly the player that we're lacking. Who's strong, small, low centre of gravity. Very hard to beat one-on-one. A couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure if this has changed. Quaynor hadn't lost a one-on-one also to that point of the season. He's, but still can attack. He's not just a tagger, so it still provides attack off half-back flank. That's the sort of player we need. And the only player I can think of, Howes looks a bit tall. Maybe Deacon Smith. Could be a player who could fill that. He seems to be that's the spot he's playing. But I wonder whether when Salo comes back, and I think we're really missing Salem's, he's an All-Australian, he's a fantastic footballer. We're missing his strength and experience, and maybe when he comes back, McVie might be that player. Maybe they'll move him into that small defensive role, because he's a pretty good competitor as well.
We have a voicemail. I'll play right now.
Good evening, Andy, George and Bin Man. It's Demonologist here. For the first time during the match against the Gold Coast and afterwards, Jacob Van Rooyen has begun to receive criticism on social media. It's the first time I've noticed this anyway. The comments have ranged from perhaps he's not as good as everyone thinks he is and has been saying that. Other comments were he needs to go back to Casey to work on his game. My question to you all is, in your opinion, is he really as good a player as predicted? Is he likely to be a star in the future for the D's? And does he need to go back to the reserves to find some form, or does he stay in the first to get the experience? And finally, has Jacob Van Rooyen been overhyped? Can he really reach the levels that our supporters hope for? Many thanks, guys, and thanks for the podcast.
It's no secret that key position players take longer to develop. You have to remember JVR is only in his second year. He played 5 or 6 games. Ideally, I would have liked him to have played alongside Ben Brown and T-Mac and take the third tall defender, whilst he's cutting his teeth. But unfortunately, injury and form hasn't allowed a settled forward line. I think he has what it takes. We can't expect him at this stage in his career to playing like he did in the fourth quarter on Anzac Eve every game. And I don't think the answer is going back to Casey. I think he's getting some good on-the-job experience. And particularly because Ben Brown and T-Mac can't seem to get a game in the ones at the moment. Although the footy department's hand might be forced this week. Bin Man, thoughts on JVR?
Working backwards from the last part of the question is, I mean, it's who knows what the future holds. But in my personal view is, yes, he is going to be an absolute star of the competition. And he reminds me so much of one of my all-time favourite players in David Schwartz, the same sort of energy and contest. I actually missed the very first goal. I missed the first and didn't watch it to the replay. I watched the replay. So I didn't realise he kicked the first goal. And that was a fantastic mark. But then after that point, I was thinking it's the sort of game that he might cop criticism for because his numbers were low. But it was a better game, I thought. I didn't know about that first goal until later. It was a better game than the Richmond game. Of course, he went nuts in the last quarter against Richmond, but his effort was fantastic and his contest was brilliant. It was really interesting after the game. Track was interviewed, I think either on the ground or I'm pretty sure it was directly on the ground, and he singled out Van Ruin's contest. Now, maybe part of that was because he was, it was in his mind, and he was concerned that Van Ruin would be upset about that incident. But it was interesting that Track really highlighted his competitiveness. So I thought his want and his ability to bring the ball, there was at least, George would have loved it. There was at least 4 aerial contests where he, if it was a percentage, he was 60-40 to lose, and he somehow managed to halve it and bring it to ground. And if Goody was asked, that's what he would say is that's his metric, I guess, one of his key things. So I thought his effort was fantastic. There's every chance he will go back to Casey at some stage to, give him a chop out maybe over the bye period. I don't know. I mean, it is a long season for a player that they've who is physically gets hit a lot, and the way he plays is very physical, isn't it? And as you pointed out, he doesn't get up the ground the way, say, a T-Mac does. And I suspect part of that is, one, his tank's not there, but 2, they want him as a power forward, and they don't want him using up his gas pushing up the ground. I think he's going to be an absolute star. He's exactly what we've needed. The last player of his ability and, I think potential is Nita. And, I see him, he's, for me, the most talented young foot forward I've ever seen is Shorter and then Hogan, and I put him up in that conversation. I think he's going to be a beauty.
Did you like what Stephen May said about him at training, that he's constantly just getting them straight in the back, and they've had to tell him ease up at training, and then he pulled him aside during one of the Richmond game, and he said, "Do what you do at training and crash through packs," and you can see he does that. He's been doing that. He did it this week.
And the incident with Ballard was really a function of his competitiveness, wasn't it? He was desperate to get to that ball. Most players wouldn't have even made that a contest. But even if you don't watch sport, like if you don't even watch footy and you don't like it, you could see how much he wants to, and it was the first game you ever watched a footy and watched him, you'd be able to tell how much he wants the pill. He just wants to be in the game, and he's going to take a handful of screamers this season, let alone over his career. He almost took another huge pack mark that would have been, he had it in his hand and it just popped out. So bright future for him in the D's.
Lefty says, Choco must have had the week off. We could not hit the side of the barn in the last quarter. The usually reliable Bailey Fritsch could have iced the game, but bad kicking let us down. I called last week. I said, you're not going to kick straight every week. And, our most reliable kick for goal had a shocker. That's going to happen. We've improved our accuracy. We've known that. We've seen the metrics this year. It's improved out of sight. Some days you nail them. Some days you don't. I was watching Bailey before the game kicking for goal. He got every single one of them. So, that just happens.
And they were accurate in that last quarter. They took their chances, apart from the big one.
Ironically, it was bad kicking that lost them the game.
Yeah. Look, you made a point before, which is right, is that there were a number of players, what I was saying is that I thought our performance was terrific, but you're right, there were a number of players who were down on the night. Nibbler was down, I thought, and Fritter was down, and he just never looked like he was getting into the run of the game, did he? And it was really interesting. I heard Chaplin, he mentioned that in a clip, I think you put it up on Demonland, that's who was he talking about? Harmsy. He was talking about Harmsy, that he was sick coming into it.
When you talk about this, okay, as a mate, I don't know where he got it from. He sent me a text and he said, hold on a second. Apparently Fritsch, Langdon, Rivers and Chandler all played 6. So he did mention Harms, but...
Chandler, sorry. Chandler was the one he mentioned.
So Fritsch, Langdon, Rivers and Chandler. I can't confirm that. Obviously, someone's confirmed Chandler. Chaplin has confirmed
Well, Chaplin
Chandler.
said that on an MFC interview.
So there you go. There were probably a couple of other players that might have been under the weather. And
it looked like that. And he emphasised, so did Goody in the presser, but in that same clip that I was talking about, Chaplin talked about how proud he was of the team. And so he also mentioned 3 games in 12 days. So, I think that sometimes, of course, we don't know what happens behind the scenes, but if 4 players, crook guts is what he said about Chandler.
There you go.
Coming into a game that I've just talked about how critical fitness is, and that's going to impact your fitness. Fritter looked off, didn't he? I'm super surprised to hear that one of those players was Rivers, because he was awesome in that last quarter.
Yeah, that save. Was he the one that did that massive dive punch away? Yeah.
Yeah, directly after just an enormous effort by Viney, and it was such a weird coverage of that game. There was weird camera angles, but Viney just before that, he got to the contest, got to the ball before I forget who was the Suns player coming at him, but Viney got to it first, and the Suns player ran straight through him. It was clearly a free kick, and it was kicked down the ground. They got an intercept mark. The next kick was the one that Rivers spoiled. That had to be a free kick to Rivers, and half the players stopped because it looked like one of those ones that they were going to pay immediately. That would have iced the game then and there. But what was funny in that contest, and I'm not sure what happened, but they never had any footage of Viney being in trouble. But the fella who ran into Viney was rolling around on the ground afterwards. He come off second best.
Royal Demon has a question for you, Bin Man. In the discussion about whether Spargo was a certain starter, you were adamant that Charlie would be selected. Were you surprised that he wasn't picked? That was last week. We had that whole discussion whether Charlie, and they didn't pick him. They played him in it too. So are you surprised?
Well, one of my other resolutions this season was not to be so didactic, but clearly I've got rid of that one. And so, yes, I was really surprised that they didn't pick him. Again, I don't think it's any indication of, each game, I put this on Demon, it's probably the wrong word, but each game is in a referendum for our flag's chances. Each, in a home and away season, the 4 points is an end in of itself. So each time, we play as a better team would beat us, or when we come up against the good teams, or, what does this mean for our flag? Where I'm going with that is that, at the risk of contradicting myself, there's no question in my mind that Spargo's in the best 22 and he'll be in our finals side. So I was very surprised that they didn't pick him this week. In hindsight, there are a couple of things at play. Maybe this experimenting that we're talking about that Goody's doing, but also perhaps selection integrity. There's it's a hard team to get into. Goody makes that point all the time. Others do as well. Maybe it's just whether he figured, the luck was there. It'll be interesting to see whether he gets in this week. I'm not going to hazard a guess. But
you will be asked a bit later.
I was very surprised.
You will be asked about it a bit later on. Terence in the chat room says, hi, Big Man. It was electric moments that Chaplin mentioned the illness and he was talking about Rivers. So Rivers was also one of the players mentioned. So Chandler, Rivers, Langdon. And Langdon didn't really do much either, if I recall. So
if Rivers had sick guts and maybe diarrhea, then it'd be many Rivers run.
Another dad joke. I love it. D for Life asks, what is your view on Cozzy's treatment by the umpires? I've felt he gets a raw deal for a long time, similar to Max. Absolutely nailed 2 holding/dropping the ball tackles in quarter 1 and quarter 2, both 20 metres out from goal. Umpire bounces the ball. Then second quarter gets his head ripped off. Callers said he ducked and then backed off. I only got to see the first quarter and half of the second, but he should have got 2 to 3 goals from frees at that stage. He gets harsh treatment from what I notice. Love your work, gentlemen. Being at the game, I didn't obviously hear the commentary, but I thought Cozzy was a little bit stiff on a few occasions. I don't know if he is being treated unfairly by the umpires, but I know that the umpires are quick to not pay frees if they suspect that a player's ducking, and they might have thought that for that particular one, Big Man, is Cozzy treated harshly?
He was treated super harshly, and speaking of resolutions, as I said a couple of weeks ago, my resolution not to get too annoyed with the umpires or the commentators was the other one. Both of those resolutions were dropped in this game because it was appalling. The umpiring, the commentary was worse. There was one of them, and I think is it Long for them, who took him on 20 metres out directly from goal. Absolutely took him on. A textbook dropping the ball. Fantastic forward half pressure. Absolutely should have been rewarded. And I think there is an element of a player like Cozzy, Oliver copped it as well, is that when they're mouthy, like he is, early in his career. I mean, he's still early in his career, but I think he gets a raw deal with the umpires, a bit like Ollie did for a while, because Ollie's demonstrative, and so I think that can balance out after a while and maybe not be such an issue. What I would say is that I had the thought during the game, and again when I watched the replay, is I really liked how disciplined Cozzy was, because there were two, that particular one with Long in particular, and there was another one where he should have got dropping the ball as well. He didn't remonstrate at all. Like, he didn't react. He didn't put his hand up. He didn't look disappointed. And for me, that was something that I wanted to touch on tonight as well, is how disciplined we were in that match. And in particular, it really struck me how disciplined he was. He stopped that business, for instance, of giving away the free kick after the players kicked the ball. He hasn't given one away, I don't reckon, hardly any last year, and I can't remember one this season. He gave away 6 or 7 of them in his first season. But both of those times, particularly the Long one, I was really, really impressed that he didn't get jacked up about it, because he deserved to get a free.
Have we talked about Cozzy re-signing? Had he re-signed last week?
Yeah.
Just,
so we didn't, not in detail, but yeah, we talked to George about it. Remember, George?
Oh, yeah. Yep, we did.
Yeah.
All right. AF says, I know this might be a little difficult to discuss in podcast format. However, it would be good to get the panel's thoughts on our zone. In my view, we can no longer go forward with the 2021-2022 zone, as the opposition chip game is the way through it. I believe we have to do what occurred for at least a little while in the second quarter against Richmond, where we played one-on-one for 20 or 30 minutes from half forward, defending a stationary ball situation out of Richmond's back half. We then played a zone behind it. It means we get the game looking like the way we want it, because the opposition could not pick off the short kicks and have to go long to our interceptors. Big Man, I told AF in the podcast thread on Demonland that's right up your alley. What's your thoughts? Have we discussed this enough tonight, sort of?
Yeah, I mean, just really briefly, what I'd say is that we're still going to always use a version of zones. All teams are. Like, no one's going to go to a pure one-on-one defensive system. But it's a new defensive zone that has to deal with the ball moving quickly down the field. And I think with that, what's critical in footy now is, even if you can slow that ball movement a bit, even a little bit, that helps players get back into zone. But if you look, when you're at the footy, it's one of the great things about watching the game at the footy is we still keep our defender deep when the ball goes up the ground. But Collingwood, for instance, and the Roos North Melbourne are clearly copying Collingwood's defensive system. Their back defender, their last defender in the line, is really high. They push up really high. So, that's a form of zone. And we'll always, I think, have that goalkeeper role, that deep player who can get back. So, definitely a different setup than 21-22, but that's because the game's looking different.
Buck Neckard says, there's been a lot of chat on Demonland about where we are at in the scheme of things based upon this game and some trends. Smashed in the clearances and stats that seem to matter to us. Forward line mix is still up in the air. Back line seems to be struggling. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of where we are at? What is our biggest area of concern from your perspectives? And I guess for mine, all the areas that you mentioned, Buck Neckard, are a concern for me. But yes, we're 6-2 and we have a healthy percentage, but we haven't exactly had a tough draw today. With the exception of the Bulldogs, who weren't exactly firing in the first few weeks of the season, we haven't played or beaten a top 8 team. Our other wins are Sydney 11th, Gold Coast 14th, Richmond 15th, North 16th, West Coast 17th. We play the Hawks, who are 18th this week. Our real test will be in the next few weeks after going into the and after that going into the bye, with Port 5th, Freo 12th, Carlton 8th, and the Pies 1st. And I think we'll get a better picture then, and hopefully we'll have a settled forward and back line by then. Big man, where do you think we're currently at, and what's your biggest area of concern, if you have any? Because I don't think you do.
Probably. Well, I mean, I definitely have some sort of areas of concern, which is that small defend. I mean, it's where we give up goals. Is that medium player is, they become so important in footy. That sort of medium tall that gets, we've got to win more ground balls in our defensive area. We get cut up in that area. We can, struggle with that. So that would be. It's not an easy fix. So maybe, as I said, when Salo comes back, that'll free up the Judds to be able to play that role, or maybe Deacon Smith at the back end of the season, although that's probably pretty unlikely. Where we're at, I think, as I've said, I think we're in really good shape. It's a bit of a concern. I think I'm concerned about T-Mac's fitness. I'm concerned that BB's, Benny Brown's also maybe not fit in the way, I think it's more of a preparation issue. Both of them, I mean, Liz Frank for T-Mac and Degenerate, it's a knee thing, isn't it, for Ben Brown, who's going to have that for the rest of his career. So I think they're managing those players. I think we're in really, really good shape. I think, for me, it's Melbourne. If I was doing a seeding, I'd have Melbourne on top, Brisbane second, Geelong third, and Collingwood fourth.
You really don't like Collingwood?
I don't like Collingwood, no, but I just think they're overrated. And the numbers. I mean, I know they're on top of the ladder, but the last 3 weeks they've struggled to score because teams are working them out. They're hammering Dacos, which we will, and they're stopping the ball into the corridor. They're just taking that away from Collingwood altogether, and they can barely score at the moment.
We have another caller on the line. Welcome to the podcast. Who am I talking to?
Yeah, hello, this is Enzo. How you guys going?
Good, thanks, Enzo. What can we do for you?
Oh, I just wanted to make some observations about how we're playing this year, about the competition.
Sure.
And all of that. Well, I think, Collingwood beats teams like in the last second, right? And everybody applauds how great they are, and they say, oh, they've got no deficiencies, that team. They've got no weaknesses. They're just such a great side. But then when Melbourne, when we win by 5 points, just win by games, it's the end of the world, and we can't play well, and the opposition beat us, and we're not as good as Collingwood. It's such a strange contrast that when they win the close ones, they're the greatest team ever, and when Melbourne wins close ones, they should have lost that one. Like even this game with the Gold Coast, like people on at AFL All Access area going, Gold Coast should have won that game. Well, that's total bull, because if Bailey kicked like he normally kicks, we win by 4 goals, and it's not even close in that last quarter because 2 goals 6. And Bailey Fritz, obviously, he was thinking about the record in his brain, the 35 games in a row, and that was obviously weighing on his mind, or something was weighing on his mind, because those shots he missed were just like he just didn't want to kick him or something. Maybe that might be a good thing, because now he's not going to think about that streak, keeping the streak going, so might not have as much pressure on that. And the way Melbourne's playing, I think last year we can all agree that Melbourne got too predictable, did they not? They got very predictable, and by the end of the season, everybody worked this out. Now, I think what Goody's purposely doing is he's experimenting. Like last year, he didn't experiment, just had the same game plan, he didn't change it. And he's purposely playing totally different right now to the way we're going to play at the end of the year. I reckon the reason why Brown is not in the side at the moment is not because he doesn't think he's good enough. He had that back injury. So I think as soon as Brown gets back to 100% fitness, he's straight back in the side. I think the selection of this game was a bit wrong. I think maybe Brown might have been able to come in this week, and Petty should have went back because the Gold Coast had 3 big forwards, but we didn't have really big three big backmen to counteract that. So they stretched us. So maybe he thinks that Brown wasn't right. And also, I think why we're inconsistent is we're running way more players through the middle. So the last couple of years, Viney, Track, and Oliver pretty much took 80% of the bounces together, centre bounces together, the clearances, and we're one of the top sides in that area. So we're running more players through that because I think the whole thing Goody is trying to do is make the whole team unpredictable, and he doesn't want the opposition to know how we're going to play our proper game until, like even in 21, people think of the side was so great in 21, but everybody's got to remember that Melbourne didn't beat anybody by more than 10 goals until they beat the Gold Coast by 98 points. By then, Melbourne were only winning by 30, 40 points every week. And the side got settled, the forward line got settled right at the end. And I think Goody's sort of like trying to get that again to not let everybody know what we're going to do until, and then when it comes to the finals, it's going to change it all. And with Collingwood, really, I think they're fit, but I reckon the reason why they're running that last quarter so well is because I reckon they conserve their energy for at least half of the game. That's why you always see them fall behind in third quarters. I reckon they're pretty much resting that third quarter and playing slower so they can reserve their energies for the last quarter. Because I think that was a mistake that Melbourne played last year. I don't know whether it was a fitness, but we were too fast in the first half of games, and in the second half we had no petrol left. And I think we learned from Collingwood is there's no point playing your best footy in the first half. You've got to play it in the third and fourth quarters, and that's the way games are going to be won. So it's going to be really good, the Queen's birthday. So that's my observations why we're inconsistent and all that. But just like they said, there's no point being perfect, and we're not going to settle on our best team until it really matters. And that's it.
Thanks for that, Enzo. Binman, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, fantastic points, Enzo. I agree with all of it. It'd be good. Maybe the Collingwood thing, my angst is that, you can't turn on a footy show at the moment without them talking about Collingwood, which is okay, and it's good that we're off Broadway. But I wouldn't mind some time and energy spent on analysing Melbourne, other than criticising us. And this week will be, the only discussion about Melbourne this week will be about Van Ruin. But the point Enzo's making is a really good one about us coming back. We came back from Richmond twice, 25 points down. Twice we were 25 points down and still got up in that game. We did win this game. We fought it out right to the end. As I said, our pressure rating was enormous, almost at the elite level in that last quarter. That's huge. No one's talking about that. I think that, I agree, Enzo, and particularly around the fact that I think that Goody's really, as I said before, leaning into experimenting and changing things up and keeping things fresh. But the other thing that I think Enzo makes a really excellent point is the midfield. We really have been rolling, different players through there and different looks. And, I think that Goody will solidify some of these systems defensively and offensively, but probably not till closer to the end of the season.
Doug Reamer writes the following: I'll make a statement about our year so far and the media bias that is working to our favour. I think we are slipping under the radar again like we did in 2021. Of the 8 rounds played so far, we've been to Queensland twice and Perth once, as well as the Gather round, which was off the back of a trip to Perth. We dismantled Sydney at full strength without Ben Brown and Max Gawn by 50 points, made a mockery of North, who the Saints struggled against this week, went to beat the Suns, who both the Cats and Pies lost to up there, but he later wrote that he was wrong. The Pies lost to the Lions. And after losing Max, almost pegged back a 40-point lead against the Lions. Say what you will, it's in the book. Yet all the hype is about Collingwood's high-scoring, never-say-die attitude. The fact that the Pies keep sides in the games for too long for me is a weakness, and if you take your chances, you can snuff them out and keep them down. I think all you need is a strong backline and a wise midfield to stop them in the last quarter. Four of our next 6 are at the MCG with 1 at Geelong. Port will be tough, and Carlton have been figured out, and King's birthday is potentially a grand final preview. In my opinion, regardless of whether Van Rooyen gets off or is suspended, I think we can expect to see Ben Brown come back in this week, and they'll persist with Petty up forward for 1 more week. If Van Rooyen doesn't get off, my smoky would be Joel Smith and Brown to come back into the side. Thoughts on our forward structure for the next month? Can you see a smoky like Seston getting a look in? Also, Harms looks like he's the next mid into the side. Sorry, I feel like Chris from Camberwell here. Peace, Fogman off the iTunes review. So thank you, Doug Reamer, and as Fogman for your nice 5-star review last week. I think he's talked about a lot of the stuff he talked about.
And I agree with I agree with Enzo, and I agree totally with Fogman / Doug Reamer. Absolutely.
All right, Singer asks, how awful was the Fox commentary for this game? Outright barracking for the Suns to get over the line, not to mention every suspect non-free for the Suns was dissected frame by frame multiple times, but any non-free to the Ds was blatantly ignored. Bimman, I was at the game, so I wasn't troubled by the biased commentary in this game. I will say that I have noticed a lot of barracking from the commentary box for many non-Demons games this year. In particular, the Essendon Port game, they were trying to will Essendon over the line, and we all know BT's penchant for barracking for the Pies. So how did you find the commentary this week? You've just touched on it that you thought it was terrible. So,
as I said, it's like just... I've really tried, and I've largely succeeded this year. I'm not getting wound up by the commentators. But it was appalling. Like, the first thing is, why do they need so many people talking? Like,
because it's commentary.
No, like they're having a conversation. It's not commentary. Commentary is, here's what is happening before, this is what is interesting about this game. They're just basically 4 blokes having a conversation. And, a lot of to be honest, I was infuriated by the way that they were rabbiting on about Van Rooyen. They were basically, when that Ballard thing, they were really having a shot at him. And, I forget some of the phrases. One was, Dwayne talking, I forget exactly what he said, but the implication was it was sort of thuggish. And that whole 10 minutes or whatever, 6 or 7 minutes, it was, 30 replays of the incident, close-ups of Van Rooyen. They're trying to make this narrative out of the drama of it all. They had turned the effect mics up. Like Channel 7 was like someone on Acid Flashbacks was in control of the production, because they turn up the effects mic, and if you listen to the replay, someone yells out, you're an animal about Van Rooyen. So they've got all of this white noise in the background, and I thought the commentary was rubbish. And the other and also the actual coverage. The other thing that was driving me nuts is the camera shots were on the ball. You could not. There were about 6 or 7 contests where you had no idea whether it was going to be a Melbourne player coming at the ball with the person with the ball, or there was no one in front of them. So it was, and then there was this weird series of free kicks. There was, you're at the ground. What was the Ben King one? They didn't even show the replay of it. Did you see the one at the third quarter, the end of the third quarter, where he got a free kick?
I don't even know I don't know what it was for. All of a sudden, the whistle goes. I don't think Ben King knew what it was, that it was his.
It might have been the previous. It was one of them that they didn't even show. I think it was the one previous. Is that there was no indication what the free kick was for, and instead of showing a replay, it was on Fox, so they don't go to the ad like they would on 7. I know that the KO or Fox they run it through, but in the gap between the goal where they should have been showing the replay of what the incident was, how we were taking a goal off us, they instead showed footage of King's 12 shots without missing. Like, I don't.
Oh, they did that on. They did that on the scoreboard. That was on the scoreboard.
Right. Well, that was on the coverage.
Wow.
I would have preferred to see what the free kick was paid for. And they didn't. The commentators didn't even say what the free kick was, which is their job, is to tell the viewers what is happening, not to have their bloody back and forth chat. So it was appalling.
It's a real failed experiment as a team, and I'm not talking about the team that plays. I'm talking about having a team up there. There were 11,000 people there. It was probably 55-45 in favour of them. based on, when a goal was kicked. There were quite a number of Ds. Like everywhere I looked, before the game, I thought it was going to be 60-40 Ds. There were that many Ds people there and about. And I guess even the Suns people, they don't even wear, a Suns scarf or a hat. You can't tell who it is. I think it's just a failed experiment as a team. As a club, not the players who play. And
I really like the Suns as a footy club. The whole AFL's invested in it. We've gone too far down that track.
No, it's not going to disappear.
The competition needs them to be successful. And they play a good brand of footy to get people there. They really did miss Tukmula, did they? And they miss a bit of class. At the end of the day, the other thing about this game is forget system, forget fitness, forget those things, is the class of players really shone out. I mean, that goal from track, where I don't know where you were sitting, but that was just
the bending, the one.
Yeah.
The
time of it.
I was right behind it.
Won us the game.
Yeah.
So Viney was enormous in that last quarter. Oliver was enormous in that last quarter. I mean, the other interesting thing about, the commentary was, again, it's like King just cherry picks stats all the way through. He's getting fed into his mic or he's got it on his laptop in front of him. And then he nonsense like, that we were humbled. I mean, it's ridiculous. And as I said, not supported by their own data. But the other one was the influence of Oliver. I don't think that they nearly, gave Oliver the credit for his game. He had 9 score involvements, more than anyone else on the ground. But I didn't hear one commentator mention that. So hugely influential on the result. He's a machine that maybe the best contested ball winner I've ever seen play, maybe of all time, certainly at Melbourne. He was awesome in that game, and he won. I think he was 2 off our most contested ball, despite 28. I think 28 possessions he finished with, didn't he?
Mm.
So but 9 score involvements for a player, they should have been focusing on that. I think the next was 7 with, so he had the most score involvements on the ground, but you wouldn't know that watching the commentary.
El Diablo wants us to please discuss the farce that the MRO is. I think the club should publicly expose the MRO and their biases, and then in brackets, Cripps debacle. And we all know that consistency has never been a strong suit of the MRO. It seems that week to week, case to case, the goalposts are constantly being shifted. I think maybe the 2 weeks is a bit harsh. He wasn't intentionally striking the jaw, and players that have done that in the past have received less. And I think we are appealing. That was announced today, and I'm not sure he will get off. I think the best we can hope for is maybe a reduced sentence. Is that a possibility, or is it just can you get reduced sentences, or is this either gets off or stays?
It depends on that. I think I'm not sure. I think you can get a reduced sentence, probably not from the fixed, only if it was higher, I would suspect. I mean, I've got no issue with the MRO, and it's good that we've appealed it. It's not Christian's fault, is it? Like, it's he's got the system, so it's not the MRO in of itself. It's the scoring system. That's the issue. But for me, the thing about Ruiz is that he'll get off, hopefully, because he didn't hit him in the head. And what,
And he wasn't concussed either, so that's in his favour, isn't it?
Well, totally. I mean, the thing is that not only, my take on it was that Van Ruin could have ruined him. He could have gone straight through him. But he actually, if you watch the replay, he appeared to take care, in my view, to not actually get him in the head. He lifts his arm. If you watch it, he lifts his arm up right at the last second so he doesn't clip him in the head. And, if I'm right in saying that, what players are supposed to be doing is showing a duty of care to their opponent, accept the risk if someone's hurt, and particularly if they're concussed, and if that happens, they'll face a penalty. Well, Ballard wasn't injured. He apparently is fine. He's going to play next week. He wasn't concussed. He grabbed his head, but he'd already been hit in the head. So perhaps that was a factor because he had clipped him with his knee. So in contrary to the pathetic jump to conclusion commentary of Dunstall and Dwayne, he didn't hit him in the head, as I said. and Ballard's head didn't hit the ground either. He's got a sore neck. That was the concern on the ground. You could see it, and I don't know why the commentators weren't saying it. You could see that their worry was the neck, and that's why they took so much care, and totally appropriately. But imagine how different the whole thing would have been if he'd just got up under his own steam and walked off. He's not injured. He didn't get hit in the head, so hopefully he'll get off.
The Casey Demons got sunburned on the Gold Coast, but were by no means disgraced despite losing their second match in 3 weeks, this time to ladder leaders the Suns. Their cause was not helped by injuries to midfield playmaker Luke Dunstan, who accumulated 46 disposals in a game a fortnight ago, and key forward Tom McDonald, who hurt his ankle at training, as well as Melbourne's decision to rest Michael Hibberd, which meant that Daniel Turner was co-opted into the big time for his second game, and it need not be stated, but Jimmy Munro's heavy tackling work is very much missed at the moment. The Suns had the answer for everything that Casey threw at them and finally cut through one of the strongest defences in the competition to finish with a 20-point win to retain top spot on the ladder. Ben Brown kicked 3 goals, Joel Smith kicked 2, Charlie Spargo had 22 disposals. Blake Howes continues to rack up disposals off half-back with 23. Bailey Laurie and Tajwo Woden got plenty of the ball as well. Filling in a key defensive role in place of Disco Turner, Demon rookie Jed Adams played one of his best games. So we'll move on for that because neither of us saw the game.
Just a question, Andy. So did you say that Hibbo was what did Hibbo
That was according to Casey from Casey. So I don't know. I mean, he's had the Achilles and calf and whatever, so I don't know if it pulled up sore or whether they just thought they'd rest him. I don't know. Maybe they always were going to rest him. I don't know. And
it's interesting
maybe
because
we were foxing with we were going to play 3 tools in the defence. I don't know.
Well, Disco wasn't one of the emergency though, was he? Or was he?
He was one of the 4 emergencies.
He was
yes.
one of okay, right.
We had a training report. Demonland track watcher Kev Martin ventured out to Gosh's paddock for today's training session, and he had the following to report. Light duties, Frida, Rivers, Tomlinson, Wowie, Kay Turner and Varel. Salem, T-Mac, Chandler and Hibbo were all full training. Big Benny Brown, Tomlinson, Frida and Rivers then joined the main group after the warm-ups. Lily Mitham, Megan Fitzsimmons and Eliza McNamara of the AFLW joined in some of the drills, all under the guidance of Choco Williams. Frida then left the main training group to practice his goal kicking, and so he should. Just kidding. The team then split into 3 squads for a handball game, a soccer game, and skills training with Choco. Dunstan was in the rehab group with his right calf. Big Benny Brown and Tomlinson left early when the others started running harder. Then it was a full squad drill, which consisted of short passes in a pocket that ends up on a corner of the 50, then the kick and run around to the points of the square, which finishes with a lead to the forward area and a kick on goal, all rotated through the ground. This was that was it, just a 35-minute session. A few of them finished with some goal kicking track. Oliver Cozzi, Jay Smith, Farris White, Grundy, Bowie and the women. Viney was ball handling with a trainer. May, Lever, Hibbo and Petty were having a chat. I asked Kev whether it was a brainstorming session or just a casual chat, and he said it looked like a brainstorming session of more than 5 minutes, and Petty was into it. I'd say Petty is working out of the back line, or at least the swingman. So that's the training with Kev report. Might need a stinger for that one.
Quality reports, so I have to say it's fantastic. That sort of insight as well. He was well ahead of the curve of Petty moving forward, which he'd flagged in the week and then reinforced from the captain's run. And now we're hearing Petty's going back. So
we'll see. They just had a chat, so we don't know. Maybe maybe while the others were having goal kicking, the defenders were just having a casual conversation. But hopefully it was a brainstorming session. Let's get into changes. At this stage, the fate of Jacob Van Rooyen's appeal of his 2-match suspension is unknown. So we'll go on the assumption that he won't be playing this week. Ben Brown's kicked the 3 goals at Casey. Spargo played well in the 2s. T-Mac and Hibberd were in full training, as we just heard. And B-Man, before you answer that question of who comes in and who goes out, we have we've got a call. I'll read D.L. Fart, what D.L. Fart said. He said, Spargo was among our best for Casey, and I think we missed his delivery inside 50 and probably his forward 50 pressures as well. Do the panel agree? If so, and he comes in, who goes out? In my opinion, both JJ and Chin have earned another week. And we've got a caller. One sec.
G'day, this is Engi from Noosa, long-time listener, first-time caller. just ringing to say, guys, are doing an amazing job for all us Melbourne supporters out there. I was just reading the Courier Mail this morning in the obituaries, and I saw it was "Rest in Peace, the Petty Experiment." Just wondering what you guys think is our next move forward if Van Rooyen isn't out and we win the appeal. Is big Benny Brown back in the team this weekend? And
You won't like this
my
bit.
second
Big man.
question is Nibbler. I know he's a role player.
Oh,
I just wish his role was an AFL footballer sometimes.
I told you you
but
wouldn't like it.
considering Spargo can't get back in the team, would you think those two could be a like-for-like swap this coming Saturday? Andy, it was great seeing you at Metricon, or whatever it's called these days, on Saturday twilight game. And, yeah, guys, keep up the great work. Love your work. Bye.
I do know Engie, but don't hold his views of Nibbler against me. That's not coming from me. And I know you're not going to agree with that, and neither do I. So, yeah.
I tell you, I am grumpy tonight, aren't I? That's I won't say there's zero chance of Nibbler getting dropped, but there is zero chance of Nibbler getting dropped this week. No chance, unless he's managed and rested. And, Spargo may not come back in. It depends what the reason was for not selecting him. So, we know Goody doesn't like changing teams that win. That's been a consistent thing for him, so that anyone in a winning team, earns their keep. Who would come out of that team if Spargo comes in? It's a good question. I think the sub is the thing that could be used. I'd bring I'd probably put JJ back as a sub and bring Spargo in. I agree with DL Fard. I think we did miss Spargo's defensive pressure up forward, but also he's an excellent field kick. And
the delivery into the forward 50.
Yeah, well, and also just in general play. And, as much as Harms, when he came in, actually provided good energy, he's not a great kick. And you really notice in footy now, don't you, how, how important good kicking and credit to Collingwood for driving that. It's so critical to be able to, not turn the ball over. It's always been critical. But if you're going to take the ball through the midfield and be aggressive, penalty for missing a target now is you're going to give up a goal when you're aggressive. That's that risk reward stuff. So, a huge premium on quality kicks, and Spargo's a quality kick. So, there's a good chance he won't come back in this week purely because Goody's going to be, as we've talked about, in experimenting and still looking at different makeups. I think he is looking. The other benefit is to make sure players can get a crack at it this year. It's something that he was criticised a lot for last year. And perhaps with good reason of not bringing in some of those players from Casey, but he is this year, so maybe there's that's part of it. I'd say Turner comes out, but and I really do think I want to see Petty go back to defence. Hawthorn are a different challenge for us, but not perhaps the challenge, well, certainly not the challenge that the Suns were. They won't take it lightly, of course. So. That their main sort of strength, their one wood is their pace of the ball movement. They're moving it super quick. They are also a team pushing up super high with the Collingwood style defence. So, it'd be good to have, I think, towards pace is what we probably need if they're going to look at selection. So, there's every chance there'll be no change this week, I think. Ben Brown, I don't know. It depends really where his fitness is at. I wouldn't be totally shocked if they keep him for the Port game.
Well, then who replaces Van Rooyen?
Casey have got a bye this week, haven't they?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, right. So that makes things difficult. So who replaces Van Rooyen? Well, let's say Ben Brown is fit, then hopefully he comes in. T-Mac won't obviously off an injury, I guess. It's a real pain in the neck, isn't it, that Casey have got a bye?
Yeah, it also means T-Mac misses 2 games in a row.
Yeah, and probably won't go then to Port. So then that's another one. And then we've got the bye after that, haven't we? Is
no,
that the week?
we've got the bye after Collingwood.
That's right.
We've got
after
the number.
Collingwood run. So
four
just on
more
that
games.
run, after the Port game, so we've had this run of interstate games, but after the Port game, the next time we play interstate is the round 16 game, which is ironically a home game, but it's when we go to Traeger Park. So, it's huge. That's partly why this win was so big, because, we're favourites to win next week. That means we go into the Port game hopefully 8-2. And then that's the last travel we do till, that round 16 is the middle of July.
It'll be 7-2.
So 7-2, yeah, no, but yeah, coming into the Port game 7-2, with getting our travel out of the way, we don't travel again for another 6 rounds. That's incredible. We stay in Melbourne, so it was huge in terms of just getting that 4 points. Leaving aside the discussion of the game, the 4 points is really, really important.
Well, before you bank the win against Hawthorn, let's do a preview of it quickly. The Hawks are neck and neck with the Eagles and giving them a good run for their money to secure the coveted number 1 pick in the draft, with only the 1 win against fellow bottom 3 side North Melbourne. They've had some close losses against GWS and Adelaide, but still have an average losing margin of 55 points. On paper, this should be a walk in the park for the Demons, but in the past we've sometimes struggled against weaker opponents. In round 7 last season, we got out of jail again against them by 10 points. I'm sure you'll disagree with that. Big man, is any chance the Mitchell will once again have the answers to break us down, cause an upset that could cost them bottom spot?
Yes, there's a chance. I think they're in that position where they can. Each game is a free hit, isn't it? And so they can attack when they get on a roll. They move the ball super well. Their midfield numbers are really strong, actually. They've got Lewis back up forward. So the answer, if we bring our intent, if we play as well as we did in this game, and we don't have 4 players out, who are sick coming into it, and we bring the right in of, there's no way we lose this game. But if we're a little bit off, we don't bring that 180 pressure level throughout the whole match. If we don't do the running, that we need to do to protect against the ball moving up towards us, they've got the capacity to score quickly, and they'll look definitely to stretch our defence. I think they'll really look to switch corridors and to isolate. In particular, Steve May, who still looks like he's labouring a bit to my eye. I thought he played it right, actually. He killed King. King got 2 goals from free kicks, and they were talking about how well. That was another thing that really annoyed me with the commentary, talking about how well King was playing by dragging May away from the contest, but pretty high-paid decoy, if you ask me. So I thought May had a pretty good game, but he still looks like he's struggling to get down to those ground balls. So
another thing that Kev said about training was that he said May was moving really well. So
great. So maybe he's a big factor. They'll look to isolate those talls. I'm hoping Petty goes back. They're defensively, this is the one to do it, because they're not going to be able to stretch us up forward the way even the Suns look to do it. Hopefully we go in switched on, and if we do, if we go in switched on, we won't lose, but there's always a chance if we do and they get really attacking and take all their chances, then a boil over is possible.
Well, I think we'll leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. If you want to listen to the show live, then please join us at demonland.com on Monday at 8:30 p.m. Also, don't forget to check out our half-an-hour interview with 2-time All-Australian and Premiership defender Stephen May. You'll find it above this or before this show you're listening to. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers: Witches Hat, Rhino88, Good Loden, Mary and Julian, Mikey and Noah. Thank you to our voicemailers, Demonologist and Engie. Thank you to our callers, Redleg23 and Enzo. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions this week. Thank you to Mandy Lorian, Lazy, Bigfoot, Radelaide, Ross Millen, Red Jacket, El Diablo 14, Lefty, Royal Demon, D for Life, AF, Buck Naked, Singer, D Old Fart, and Kev Martin for his training report. Also, Doug Reamer did as well. Thank you to my co-hosts, Binman, and thank you to our loyal listeners. And don't forget to leave us that 5-star review and comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll read it out on the next show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.